I'm Beth Guckenberger, and this is the Reckless Faith Podcast. We're here today with my friend and colleague, Rob Hall.
Good to see you, Beth.
Thanks. Good to be here.
How are you doing?
I'm doing good.
Day 5.
I know.
We're on a journey, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it seems kind of crazy. The first few days kind of were like, I'm kind of getting, but we're full in. I mean, we're 5 days into the journey, and it's been awesome. These podcasts have been great, being able to hear some of the stories that aren't in the book, but to kind of the background or some other things. And today, He is not a Genie God. It's say yes to healing. That can conjure up a ton of ideas. The first part of that is you talk about Evan and his physical healing. You had an opportunity to talk about that in front of some of his people recently. Mm-hmm. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, in the story, Evan was just under 2 years, but today he's a 21-year-old, and he is a student at Taylor University where he plays football. And I had a chance to share in his chapel a little bit about what God did when he physically healed him. And when I finished sharing, I had him come on stage at this one point, and the students started to put together the story that I was telling about a boy that was healed was the same story that belonged to the student that they recognized from, being in class or being in a dining commons and seeing across campus. And they began to respond to him, like cheer for him. And he was, feeling all of that reaction to what God had done in him. And I stopped them and I said, hey, the whole reason we share this is not so that you now know something wildly personal about our family. We share it because we've got to remember that with God, still today, all things are possible. And that the fact that I can say that with both conviction and clarity and even enthusiasm and peace, it's a result of a different kind of healing that happened to me. That wasn't not just Evan was healed in that story. I got healing in that story too.
What's interesting about that is I think about Evan. We've known each other a long time. And, Evan, if I remember correctly, used to kind of back away from that story. He did not like to be known as the person in that story. And I was with you when you spoke at Taylor at chapel, and to see him embrace now that God had done this in his life and to literally step out on stage. I don't know if healing's the right word, but something inside of him God was healing or bringing to full fruition in his life, something through that story too.
Yeah, he definitely realizes that I think the older he gets and the more he sees stories that don't turn out that way, the more he realizes he doesn't take for granted that God had a purpose for what he did in his life. And I've told him, it's so remarkable to me because as I shared in that day, my father had passed away just shortly before Evan was healed, and I had begged God to heal my dad, and he never did. He took him instead to heaven. And I got this deep disappointment in God and confusion about his capacity and powerfulness. And it was like a bruise. And I think when we get spiritual bruises, basically when we get disappointed in people or in life, when we assign that disappointment to God, we can have this ability to create workarounds so that we don't touch the pain of those bruises again. And when we fell in love and adopted this little boy who had this extraordinary special need, it was like constantly stepping on that bruise. Like, are you powerful enough to do this? Would you even do it if I asked? And what do I need to do in order to get your attention? And all the questions that stirred up in my bruise. And it was at the culmination of his healing. And as we really fully kept wrapping our head and mind around what God had done for Evan, it was like, oh, okay, so maybe I am made in the image of you, and you can do, sovereign God, whatever you want. And in this story, this is what you wanted. And not you are made in my image, and I can manipulate you, even spiritually, with my fasting or my oils or my 2 or 3 are gathered. Like you are sovereign, and I need to learn how to submit to that sovereignty. And man, that set me up really well for the hard stories I would later walk into.
Deep stuff today.
Deep stuff. I told you.
Deep stuff in our bonus material. Day 5 already.
Day 5. Here we go.
But it's such an important thing as people are hopefully getting deeper into the journey and God is revealing things to them. I'm guessing that they sense spiritual bruises in themselves that they've either avoided or that they now need for their own spiritual healing need to pay attention to.
Yeah, particularly that relationship with reckless faith is you get afraid to step out. With the last time you stepped out, it didn't work out the way you wanted, or if you get afraid to trust and dream and risk and sacrifice because that's not how you thought it was going to be. And so, coming to terms, feeling God's sovereignty, trusting in God's plan is a really big part of drawing. You got to draw from that well to live a reckless life.
Yeah, yeah. One thing I love about the book is that in the midst of these deep conversations and spiritual healing and going on a journey, you have these ultimately practical action steps. And today's I think is really great. Find a Band-Aid and write down the name of a disappointment in life that can still feel bruised to you. Wear it throughout the day and ask God for healing from it. I am totally interested in what you wrote down on your Band-Aid.
I wrote down somebody's name who I had a broken relationship with, and with whom we had decided to kind of just part ways. And I thought, at the time, it actually felt like a relief to break relationship with them. But as I was doing some reflecting on spiritual bruises, I realized there was some unfinished business there. And I was bringing some of the disappointment I had in that relationship into another relationship that felt like a first cousin, like it had some similar characteristics. And I was tainting a new relationship as a result of work I had to do on an old one. So that's what I wrote on my Band-Aid. That's the spiritual bruise that needed healing.
Wow. Okay. Man, day 5 seems like I'm going through a devotional and all this stuff is happening. I mean, it's really great stuff. If you have reckless faith, a 40-day journey to saying yes, we really hope that the podcast keeps you focused, keeps you energized and on this journey. And we also hope that it'll lead to meaningful conversations like the ones that we're having, not only with God, but with other people. If you're here and haven't yet gotten a copy, you can find it on Amazon, or the book and other resources are on backtoback.org/40 days. That's BACK, the number 2, BACK.org/40 days.
Thanks for being on this journey with us to a more reckless faith. And until next time.